Let's start talking about the 1920s. We'll shift now to history and talk a little bit about the history of the 1920s. I want to talk today mostly about the transition, a few historical developments. Later, when we get to Fitzgerald, I'm going to talk much more about the cultural impact of the Roaring Twenties. This part gets to be optimistic and happy. This is now part of what is past or passing or to come. The sort of Roaring Twenties part that makes you look around at the beginning of the poem and say, wow, all of these things, it looks like life is thriving, bubbling, things are going well. At first, it's not the way it looked. In 1918, here you see Washington Times trumpeting the headline, "War officially ends." And so the First World War ends. You might think that things are very good as a result of that, but actually notice some of the subsidiary headlines. Berlin faced by mutiny of troops. Reds urge revolt. America leads allies in signing the Treaty of Versailles today. And that Treaty of Versailles sets up many of the conditions for the next World War. But it's not just that. There were a series of disruptions that made the late teens and very early 20s in more immensely difficult times for a variety of reasons throughout the world. Here are some of the social and economic disruptions. First of all, epidemics. We'll talk much more about that, but millions and millions of people died from the Spanish flu of 1918 and from other diseases. In fact, as many as 500,000 Germans died between the signing of the armistice and the official terms of peace beginning in 1919. Hunger, not only in Germany but throughout many parts of the world. Huge numbers of people had moved from place to place. It took them away from food supplies. The war had devastated fields, farms, factories all throughout Europe. There was continued fighting. The war for Polish independence, for example, continued for several years after the end of the World War itself. There was a severe recession, not only in the United States, but in much of the world. Labor disputes and strikes disrupted what economic activity was going on. We've already talked some about race riots. There were also anarchist bombings, especially in the United States, that were serious and took place in a number of major cities. Well, here is an image of a ward of patients with the Spanish flu, breaking out in 1918 around the end of the war, and actually helping to devastate the German lines. It's part of what led to the German surrender, more than any military victory. You had people all around the world fighting this flu. Here you see nurses carrying a patient. Here, a ward set up on what had been a porch. It lasted from January 1918 until the end of 1920. It is estimated that 20 to 50 million people died from the Spanish flu. That was perhaps as much as 3% of the world's population. It was a huge number of people, and it was concentrated in areas that had been disrupted by the war. It was spread very rapidly by troops coming home to their home countries and bringing the flu with them. The United States, for example, was very heavily hit. It started in the trenches of Europe, but then followed the troops wherever they went. There were other kinds of turmoil in the United States throughout 1919. There was the advent of prohibition. One of the Wilson administration goals was to prohibit the sale of alcohol. The progressives were they began the war on drugs, really, and started the attack on alcohol. It had begun in the 19th century, but they began a real political push, and that took effect in January of 1919. There were a series of anarchist mail bombings that we'll talk about. 38 U.S. cities saw race riots in what was referred to as the Red Summer. There is a phenomenon known as the Red Scare, where 14,000 leftists, socialists, communists of a variety of stripes were held without charge, and some were deported. There were strikes in Seattle, Boston, and in steel factories throughout the country, Pittsburgh, Gary, and a variety of other cities. And then finally in October, President Wilson had a stroke and became incapacitated. It all led to a sense that things were spinning out of control, indeed. Here you see some images of prohibition. There are people pouring a barrel of beer into the sewers. Here, seizing barrels of beer and bottles of liquor. And look at the, well, I don't know if you can see the eyes of those police officers, but they're looking down as if, dang, I wish I could take those home. Here is the result of one of the bombings, the anarchist bombings, this one on Wall Street. And here you see the broader scene that day. And there are some of the people who were injured being carried away. You can still see the effects of this on Wall Street. The bullet, well, the very shrapnel bits and that significant one there knocked out. You can see how large it is by the hand beside it. There were 9 bomb explosions in 8 eastern cities. And that sort of thing happened a number of times. Washington, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland. There was an attempt to assassinate the Attorney General of the United States, A. Mitchell Palmer, and also a judge in New York. This was eventually traced to a sort of communist anarchist group out of New York. And as you can see, it was major news for months in the United States. The Senate, meanwhile, voted for women's suffrage. 19 were arrested here, and this is part of what sparked this phenomenon known as the Red Scare. Here you see one of the offices that had been destroyed by the bombings. Then we've talked some about the race riots and lynchings. This was a high point of lynchings and race riots in the United States. The event in Omaha that I talked about earlier, riots in Chicago, in Washington, church burnings, and a variety of other things. We have here strikes in Seattle, Boston. And then to add insult to injury, the 1919 World Series, which it turned out was thrown by the Chicago White Sox, henceforth known as the Black Sox. And probably enough the Cincinnati Reds actually won the World Series. Immediately people were suspicious of that, partly because Cincinnati seemed like a far weaker team. And it meant, and here's why it was of some psychological significance, and not just for those of us who love baseball and the history of baseball. Baseball was the national pastime. It occupied a role in American culture then that baseball, basketball, and football altogether may occupy now. There was no such thing as the NBA in those days. There was no such thing as the NFL. There was one American sport really, and it was baseball. And so when it turned out that the very heart of it was corrupt, that really shook people's faith in, well, you might say something that they thought was the height of innocence, something that was pure competition where the effect of money and other kinds of ethical failings were not likely to be, well, those are the White Sox. Many of the players were disbarred for life. Now, the election in 1920 pitted a Democrat, Cox, against a Republican Harding. Harding argued for a return to normalcy. That was his platform. It wasn't really any dramatic change. It was rather, let's get back to normal. All of these things had exhausted the public, not only tired of war, tired of recession, but tired of the sense that American civilization was being ripped apart. And so as you see, Cox won the South, but otherwise Harding won a resounding victory. He was elected with more than 60% of the popular vote. It was the first presidential election in which women voted. And here was his key quotation. America's present need is not heroics, but healing. Not nostrums, but normalcy. Not revolution, but restoration. Not surgery, but security. And so getting things back to normal was his basic case. And it was a very appealing case to the American public that was tired of all the other disruptions. Here you see his inauguration, and the tremendous throng of people gathered to witness it. There is Harding with his wife. There he is looking thoughtful. There's the official portrait. Here he is shaking hands with Babe Ruth. And you can see Harding thinks this is great. And the Babe is not so excited. Harding's like, oh, oh! And the Babe's like, anyway, yeah. Here he is in another official portrait. And there's, well, never mind. Okay, he inherited a severe recession. The country was in turmoil. He was somebody who really was elected not because he was dynamic, but supposed to be a steady hand. He was a practitioner of laissez-faire economics, which means let it be. Okay? In other words, he was something like an extreme libertarian. He did not want the government to get involved in economic affairs, and so he tried not to interfere. His goal was to reduce the role of government. So he cut government spending by 40%. The result of that was that the economy boomed. And the result really was the roaring 20s, the prosperity that ended up lasting throughout most of the decade. He also, on his very first day in office, freed political prisoners. The various people rounded up in the Red Scare and others. There were thousands of political prisoners jailed by the Wilson administration. He set them all free. So things began to go very, very well. He also cut taxes radically. But the Teapot Dome scandal in 1923 ended up bringing his presidency to a sort of, well, standstill. His Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, took $400,000, which was a lot of money in those days, for favorable leases on government property. It was a scandal that was something that infuriated Harding. Here is Albert Fall. And here is Harding, pictured after that. I wanted to show you images of him before and after because you can see the effect on him. Before that, he was the strong and steady man. After that, he was somebody who was stunned. When he himself found out about the scandal, he called Fall into his office, and he was so angry, he went up and grabbed him by the collar and shook him and said, "What have you done to me?" Well, indeed, he did something devastating to Harding and his presidency. Here you see him. I mean, what image do you get from that photo? He's alone, right, in the woods, standing there. That's the way he felt after this. He felt utterly betrayed and abandoned. The result of it was actually a stroke. He died suddenly, not too long after that. Calvin Coolidge, his vice president, became president. Now, Coolidge was a remarkable figure. He was Ronald Reagan's hero. Reagan had the official portrait of Coolidge in the Oval Office. The chief business of the American people, Coolidge said, is business. Economy is idealism in its most practical form. He was, in a way, an unusually cultured and educated American president. It's not obvious from that picture. There he is on his Vermont farm, though you can see something that makes me like him right away. He loved cats. He also amused himself by reading Greek and Latin in the evenings. He was highly trained in the classics. And here you see him with a variety of other administration officials. Anyway, here was his idea of government. Government's role is to provide a framework within which people can seize opportunities, within which people can exercise liberty. He was suspicious of government activity and government attempts to solve problems. Basically, he was an adherent of the law of unintended consequences. The thought is that usually the unintended, unforeseen consequences of an action are actually more important than those that are intended and foreseen. And so he thought in particular that government action tended to produce more negative consequences than positive consequences. Sometimes it could indeed solve problems, but more often it would generate problems. And so he was highly suspicious of that. He said there is far more danger of harm than there is hope of good in any radical changes. And so he believed in very slow, careful change, not in very rapid change. It was too likely to have negative effects. He was famous for speaking very little. Silent cows, the way he was referred to. There's a story that a man and his wife came to a White House party, and the man came up to Coolidge and said, "I have a bet with my wife. I bet that I could get you to say at least 3 words to me." Calvin Coolidge responded, "You lose." He at one point was asked about this, and he said, "Well, my job as president is mostly to say no to people. People come in and ask for a bunch of things they should not have. And I find that if I just sit there silently, eventually they stop talking and go away." In any case, he did think that everybody, everywhere, has an unconquerable desire to be master of his own destiny. That is to say, we all want to control our own lives, and part of the government's job is to make that easier, to allow us to control our own lives, but also to facilitate them by building a broad infrastructure, you might say, within which people can do them. He refers to the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights, and therefore that government can get its power only from the consent of the governed. He says those are the 3 basic principles of American democracy. And he says about the Declaration, and here is, by the way, he's directly disagreeing with Wilson, who said, look, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, they're relics of a forgotten age, they don't any longer apply. Coolidge is saying, wait, about the Declaration there's a finality that's exceedingly restful. It's often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. This is exactly what Wilson argued in his brief. But that reason cannot be applied to this great charter. He said, if all men are created equal, that is final. If they're endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wants to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction it can go is backwards, toward the time when there wasn't equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction can't maintain the progress, they're reactionary. Their ideas aren't more modern, but more ancient than those of the revolutionary fathers. And so he argued that, well, and then I won't go through the details, but he basically argued that progressives were really taking us back to a past, not into the future. And you can see here he is shaking hands with another baseball great, Walter Johnson, who seems happier than Babe Ruth had been. Anyway, the result of this was a very rapid recovery from World War I and a fundamental change in American civilization. So later we'll talk about that. There are a number of different aspects of this. One of them that was in 1924 under Coolidge, that American Indians were finally given full rights under the Constitution. In any case, we'll reserve that for later. Next time we'll talk about